Hey guys, it's Chris for Tool Sport Garage. Today I'm going to compare 3 different visors for your windscreen because as I'm riding the 300 Rally, I'm finding that anything over 65 miles an hour and it really feels like someone's batting you on the head. So stick around. I've got the Puig Visor extension. That's about $100, give or take. I've got the KemiMoto, which is kind of a bigger one. That's about $40. And I've got Justech, which I'm also going to try. And we'll see which one performs best on the 300 Rally. Okay guys, I felt like I needed to update this video because KemiMoto has added a updated version of their windscreen visor. I'll include the original KemiMoto evaluation in case you're out there shopping, you find it for a great deal. The new version is quite a bit different and comes in at a much higher price. It's north of $60 for this particular unit. So it places it somewhere between the Puig and the other 2 options that are in this video. I'm gonna mount it up, show you how simple it is to do that, and I'll take it for a ride and show you what I found out by how well it works. At the end of the video, we'll wrap up all 4 options. So stick around, see where it stacks up, see if KemiMoto nailed it or if they made him miss the mark. In any of the adventure builds that I do, I want to make sure that these bikes can do 2,000 or 3,000 miles and you're still comfortable and you're not worn out when you're done your trip. And so in stock form, the 300 Rally, this windscreen is too short, but there's a lot of tall windscreens on the market that I'm just gonna say, if you're gonna take this off-road and do any technical off-road riding, single track, or even Jeep trails and stuff, and you wanna get over the bars, you don't want this in your face. So you really can't go any taller. I think this windscreen is the perfect height for doing everything all the time. But I think you always want to have a removable visor extension that you can add when it's time to jump on the highway, do some high speed, make up some time on your way home or whatever. So I've got a video where I build out the Puig visor. I'm going to build out the other 2 right now so you can see what that looks like. And then I'll take it out on the road and try all 3. And before the video is done, I'll give you my feedback on all 3 of them as they apply to the 300 Rally. Let's do the KemiMoto first. All right, that's kind of interesting. It comes mostly assembled. So there's a lever right here. If you spin it outward, it falls off. I mean, this is the locking lever that locks the angle of this particular pivot point. And as you just noticed, it can fall out, which is not great. So I don't like the quality of that. But once it's locked into place, it seems to be very solid. So once out on the road, it should hopefully hold its shape as far as where I set the windscreen. So then as far as adjusting it to the curvature of your windscreen, they've got an Allen key head at the top to get the angle just right and then fix that angle by spinning those Allen keys. Then these rubber pads are smooth on one side, a couple notches, and then there's a locating notch on the back, which looks like it corresponds to the 2 notches on the sides here. So that says which way it goes. We're gonna need our Allen head set screws. The kit includes 3 Allen keys. So this one is the smallest one for the set screws. Because it's gonna be pushing against rubber, I'm not gonna worry about thread locker. So looking at the little wedge that they've provided, this wedge corresponds to 2 set screws and the 1 dimple. So I'm gonna take the plastic little wedge shaped thing with the slope facing forward, the slope, and sliding it in to this space. And then it basically ends up flush, you can't see it at all. And then when we turn the set screws, it's gonna push that little plastic piece down to clamp. Okay, now that I have those wedge pieces in, put the rubber in, back in place, and then I'm all set to put that on the windscreen. So the other piece of adjustability is these 2 adjusters, which tighten up the pivot point right here. Unlike the Puig, you can't vary the distance between these 2. This does not pivot in and out. It just pivots up and down. The only in and out pivoting is happening up here. So once we get this in place, so the distance between these 2 is not going to change, but it looks like it should be okay on the 300 Rally. All right, everything is nice and loose. So I don't feel like there's any tension on any of the pivot points. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp it on. Right now I'm picking up about an inch, inch and a half, in additional height. So I think I'll try it with just that much more wind protection, see what it does, and then just play with a couple of the different settings. As far as aesthetics go, it's a little too big. It's wider, just ever slightly wider, maybe half an inch wider than the 300 Rally windscreen, so I'm not loving it for that. As far as on the windscreen, where the set screws are holding on, it feels solid as a rock. I can shake the whole bike. So most likely I'll lose one of these little bits eventually over time. So that's what I'm concerned about. But I'll test it as is and let you know how it works out as far as managing the wind. Okay, so the KemiMoto Visor actually looks really good on the bike. And while you're riding, the blacked out hardware doesn't distract at all. It's probably the least noticeable visor just because it's so big, it's really easy to see through. I logged a couple hundred miles with the visor in place and found that it stayed put. It didn't budge at all, notwithstanding that one little plastic piece which seemed to come loose during an installation. So obviously there's a build quality issue there. If you get things clamped down and into place, you may find that this holds up pretty well. As you'd expect, it improves wind protection everywhere. It does a nice job of directing the airflow. It really smooths out and does deliver an improvement and eliminates that buffeting at highway speeds. And of course, in the long run, it's just a question of the build quality of the hardware. And especially if you're taking it off and putting it back on a regular basis, this hardware is the most likely to be damaged. And certainly if you drop the bike, this visor does stand off the windscreen quite a bit, and so is probably the most vulnerable of the three. All right, next up, let's assemble the Justech. The clamps are softer and more feel like silicone, so these feel like they would grip better. There's also no resistance on these set screws. In this case, I would probably put a drop of thread lock on these. I mean, the threads are not tight at all, so I wouldn't trust the little bit of cushioning in the clamp to keep these from rattling loose. All right, so we take this little piece of metal, slide it into this silicone boot, and then slide it on. That'll distribute the pressure of the set screws. We're gonna put the clamp over top, and then this looks just like a cam that you would have on maybe a seat on a bicycle. So open all the way, and it looks like we're gonna have a washer on one side and a washer on the other. So we want it somewhat loose until we get it on the bike, because this will allow me to change the angle and the height. So just while I'm doing the install, I'm gonna put it at the very top of the range. Go ahead and screw it onto the windscreen. Okay, so the Justech visor looks good on the bike, and the adjustability, it's easy thanks to the cam lock. I was surprised just how bright the silver finish is on the hardware. It really reflects a lot of the sunlight into your eyes, which is very distracting while you're riding in the midday sun. Wind protection is definitely improved at modest speeds around town, but at highway speeds, the buffeting is just as bad as if you didn't have a visor, which is surprising, and might actually be worse at high speeds. Not sure if it just doesn't seem to be managing the airflow or smoothing things out. So around town, the additional wind protection is noticeable, but definitely at high speeds, it does not deliver on the promise of eliminating that annoying buffeting. Because this is so soft, the metal just shifts around. As soon as the set screws start to push on it, they seem to squeeze out of the way. They didn't squeeze all the way out of the way, but you can see they're probably hanging off halfway. So I figure these pieces of metal should be cupped somehow so they don't squirm around, but nevertheless, this particular visor was less effective than the other one, and we'll see what happens with the third one. So these screws are 5/32 if you have standard measure Allen keys, fits pretty good, or 4mm fits even better. All right. Okay, so pretty straightforward. These are going to come in from the back. The writing shows you which way's up, and this bracket obviously drops in from the top, so the screw would be at the top, so that's how you want to match those up. Now you'll notice if you look closely, so I've had quite a few questions around the size of the screw versus the hole in the bracket. If you look at the screw itself, the threads on the screw are quite large as compared to the opening in the bracket. And that's designed for a purpose so that those threads can really cut into the plastic so that there's no risk that it's going to vibrate loose. So you're going to need some force. Typically an electric screwdriver is your best bet to get these seated properly. So your easiest bet is to just get that started in your hand. And it takes a little bit of force because it's really designed to cut those threads into the plastic. You know, just squeeze it in your hands, give it some force so it can bite into the plastic. And once it's got a start, you can move to the other side, get the other one started. And then we're going to use the drill driver to just zip that in there in a hurry. So just pushing with some force to get it started. It does take some finesse, but then you can see it really does open up and carve those threads in. As with most jobs, it kind of takes 3 hands to do this. Actually, might not need the drill driver after all. Yep, no, so that's starting to dig in. So go to the other side. And with a decent amount of force, that just bites right into the plastic. Yeah, don't want to twist it too hard because I don't want to strip those threads at all. Just want to make sure it's nice and snug and everything's seated against the plexiglass here of the visor. Ensure there's no gaps. That looks properly seated. So we'll do the same again. We'll give the screw a start in the bracket. Make sure we get some threads started. And just you don't want to go too far because quite frankly you go all the way through there. But just to get the thread started so we've got something to grab onto when we're assembling the visor. So pretty much that's it for assembly. The only other thing is there's caps included in the kit to cover up the screws. So that's it. The nice thing with the Puig is that you can adjust the angle that the brackets sit at, both at the front of the bracket and at the back. There's pivot points, both up and down and side to side. So it really does adapt to most windscreens in that way. And the only thing we have to do is loosen off this 4mm screw and install it on the bike. We'll just get this warning sticker off before we do. Nice thing about this visor as well is that you can flip it all the way down, out of the way, so that if you don't want to take it off while you're off-road riding, it's the least amount of chance that you're going to have any sort of damage or have that get in the way of your chin or whatever. So really nice with no tools whatsoever. You can just get that visor exactly where you need it. The Puig Visor, obviously the smallest of the 3, but despite the small size, it does a great job of smoothing out the airflow in all situations. Even at highway speeds, well in excess of 65 miles per hour, airflow is smooth and there's no buffeting. Adjustability is simple. All the hardware feels really sturdy, which is good because when the tarmac ends, many of us are not that good at stopping to remove the breakable bits, which means we might just leave our visor on most of the time, especially in dicey off-road situations. So it's nice to know that based on the size and the design of this particular visor and its hardware, this is the least vulnerable visor of the bunch. I could definitely see leaving this on pretty much 100% of the time. So the KemiMoto comes in a very thick plastic. It's got plastic adhered to the windscreen itself for transport, which is a great idea because actually there's a set screw that's loose. And we've got 2 Allen keys, one big, one small. The big one looks like it's for removing the windscreen on here, and the small one will be for the set screws that hold the unit against your windscreen. Yeah, so the small one We'll snug up the set screws. But the hardware is already assembled to adjust it out and back. There's no presets, so these pivots tend to move smoothly. Looks like there's rubber washers in there to give it some steadiness to where you set it up. But this is a windscreen that you're going to want to adjust it to where you want it and then tighten down with the larger Allen key, set it as far as the configuration. It articulates, as you can see, in all directions up and down. It also articulates side to side to adapt to really any shape of windscreen. It's quite a bit heavier than the other windscreen visors, but seems like it would be very durable for a very long time. All right, so the protective plastic is sandwiched by the brackets, so we're going to need to take the brackets apart, and we'll get this plastic off. Turns out that's a 5mm Allen key. It's always a good idea to spin your screw backwards to make sure that you don't cross thread it. Wait for it to click and then start to thread forward. As long as there's no resistance, you know you're not cross threading. Most of you are probably aware of that. The only potential issue that I see with this is that these set screws push up against a very soft piece of rubber, which means eventually those set screws are probably going to dig right through that. It's pretty thin. It's very grippy, so should stay in place. But if you're worried about marring your windscreen, this is potentially a consideration. I don't think it's a huge issue. I think it'll stay secured pretty well. It may end up leaving a mark on your windscreen over time. That's an area where the Puig, because it has basically silicone pads in there, are probably the least likely to harm your windscreen. So that might be a slight difference to consider when evaluating the other options. As well as the Puig's only one screw, this one would be two on each side, so tiny bit less convenient. But outside of that, really feels like a good quality item. So let's get it on the bike, let's get it test rode, and we'll see how it does. So the big Allen key heads on here are 4mm. For the set screws on the back of the windscreen here, this is 3mm set screws. And the rubber is quite soft, so the set screws kind of dig in quite easily. The only possible issue is that looking at those set screws, they're all the way in. And if I keep screwing them, basically it'll go past the threads in the bracket. So I'd say you have to be careful that you don't over tighten them, because quite frankly, you could overdo it. It feels like the brackets are maybe a little too wide. It's on here really tight and you can shake the whole bike with it. So, but you don't need a reef on it. All the way down gives you, looks like about 2 inches, right? The whole windscreen is about 5 inches. I feel like that might be the place to put it where it's not sticking out quite so vulnerable. but then this is going to be really very tall. So from a convenience perspective, the Puig you can do by hand on the fly at any time, move it up or down. This one you're going to need to carry a 4mm Allen key in your tank bag. All right, guys, so after putting the bike through its paces with the new KemiMoto windscreen, worked really, really well. Excellent protection around town, as you'd imagine. I mean, it's quite tall. The styling-wise, it fits really nicely with the 300 Rally. And at highway speeds, it's just excellent. You know, there's no buffeting whatsoever, and at about 6 feet tall, plus or minus, I think you're gonna find that this gives you all the wind protection you need up to as fast as pretty much this bike can go. So really high marks as far as managing the wind. The hardware seems solid, and it's while it's not hand adjustable on the fly, and you need to loosen off 4 bolts in order to adjust the height of the windscreen visor. It's small price to pay as far as getting something that's moderately mid-price and seems like a quality unit with excellent wind protection. All right, guys, now that we've seen all 4 windscreen visors, in reverse order, let's just go through the list. Justech is not a great design, doesn't do a great job with the wind. Also, the hardware is too bright and really not very reliable. Least favorite windscreen, and I'd say you probably want to stay away from that one. Second on the list, KemiMoto's old version, and while it represents a great value as far as dollar value is concerned, the hardware is definitely suspect. And unless you want to get your epoxy out and lock everything down, get creative, I'd say you might want to stay away from that one as well. That brings me to the Puig, which has performed really well for about a season. I've put it through its paces. It's a nice size if you're doing a bunch of off-road, and which I do a bunch of, and so I appreciate the fact that it's small enough and it's easy to just kind of mash it down, tuck it in, and it stays out of the way. And if I want to take it off, it'll fit in pretty much any tank bag or backpack or whatever. So it's really good from that perspective. Very convenient, and I would say gets the nod as far as lasting the longest in the long run if you're doing a lot of technical riding. But last on the list is our new KemiMoto windscreen visor, which does a really, really good job at managing the wind both around town and on the highway. It's super big, so if you are doing a lot of dual sport riding, it's going to be a little annoying. You're going to have to take it off. It's more effort to take off than the Puig. But if, like a lot of adventure riders, you're not doing a ton of like single track or anything like that, it's probably your best value for your dollar. So definitely worth a try, and it's going to be what I run for the rest of the season because I really want to put it through its paces. But I'm very confident in the quality. The hardware looks great, and I think it's going to perform very well because I plan to do some very long trips on the asphalt, and I think this is the way to go if you spend a lot of time on the road. And with that, I'll just remind you to hit that like, subscribe to follow along, consider supporting the channel by swinging by and picking up a t-shirt on my Etsy link, and there's always more information on my website on any of the videos that you see here. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.